Night bled away from King's Landing by degrees, the color of old pewter draining out of the sky. Dawn crept between crooked roofs and over the roofs of the Street of Steel, over the Limeburners' Quarter and the pale bones of the Hook's wharves. The first bells were scolding, thin as knives. Smoke lifted from 1,000 little cook fires, from bakeries where exhausted apprentices punched dough with hands already blistered, from charcoal braziers cradled by sleepy beggars. The river wore a skin of tarnish, and below the red keep the capstans creaked like yawns. From afar, the great September of Baelor bloomed against the light, white marble bruising into gold as the sun climbed. Margaery Tyrell stood motionless before her shuttered window and listened to the city breathing. She held a sprig of dried sweetbriar under her nose, an old trick to banish the reek of tanneries and fever-sour alleyways. The air still came through anyway, heavy with brine and brass polish and the fish stink of the river. The room was quiet. Her maids were busy with the ritual. The linen, the girdle of braided rose-hued cords, the mantle leaf green with pearls. Her hair would be braided like a crown and pinned with the little golden flowers her grandmother had sent. So small, those flowers, delicate as promises that might be broken by a sigh. "Your Grace," said Sarah, the youngest maid, timid as always. "Shall I bring milk of the poppy for your brother?" The brothers of the faith said his rest was restless. Margaery set the sweetbriar down on the sill. "No, papi. I'll send for lemon water and honey. He must meet the day with a clear mind."
Cersei mood trembled.
He barely sleeps. "I slept a little," Margaery lied. "Lemon and honey." She turned to the glass where she was all mirrored brightness, and for a moment she saw her face as a stranger might see it. Oval and pleasant, the eyes lit by some inner lark, the mouth sweetly shaped and not made for sternness. She smiled at herself as if she might coax her reflection into courage. "And have the pastry cook send pigeon pies to the September for the poor who gather outside," she added. "Fresh, not yesterday's. Tell him I'll taste them later and know if they are yesterday's."
Sera Bobet d'Anneau.
"Yes, your grace." She fled, grateful for errands. The other maid, Eleanor, older, said without looking up from the mantle's hem where she was plucking a stray thread, "The city is ill at ease. They say the High Septon commands a new prayer at dawn for the trials. They say the Queen Mother's hand is invisible in everything and her eyes are everywhere. You have me, Eleanor. That should be comfort enough for today. Comfort is poor company when flames take the rafters." Margaery let the words hang. She inhaled shallowly through her mouth. She had felt it too in the last days. A tremor beneath the city, not noise. Something in the air, some set to the wind that was not wind. Cersei Lannister had not been idle amid disgrace. Humiliation had not made her meek. It never had. There were whispers of old green fire stored in the city's belly since the Mad King. Old fire listened for fools. She picked up a length of ribbon and let it draw through her fingers. The green of it was not far from the green that haunted certain stories. Green that ate wood and flesh and water alike, that remembered everything. She laid the ribbon down. "Where is my grandmother?" she asked. Already with the maids of the September, Lady Olenna said you would join her when you've broken your fast. "She will have broken it already for both of us." Margaery smiled again, a private thing, and then turned to the table with its little plates of dried fruit, a dish of almonds, half a loaf of the raisin bread she preferred. She took nothing. The thought of food made her tongue ache for water. "Send word to Ser Merindon of the City Watch, quietly, that he is to put his most trusted men at the doors to the underground passages beneath the Great September. Tell him they are not to be seen while they are posted. And any child who appears alone near the tunnels is to be taken gently away, fed, and not questioned until I speak with them. Tell him the Queen asks, not orders." Eleanor raised her eyes at that. "Trusted men are few. All the more reason to test them." Margaery brushed the mantle straight. "And send this note as well." She crossed to the desk where she had left the parchment prepared. Nothing more than the inked call of a flower show at the Dragon Gate with the little sign she had taught certain children to read. A rose with 4 thorns rather than 5. "To the kitchens on Rattleshirt Lane, it will find its way." "You doubt the faith," Eleanor said softly. "I doubt carelessness," said Margaery. and there was steel in her voice. "And I doubt that the woman who nursed Joffrey and birthed Tommen will attend a trial where humiliation is guaranteed, unless she intends to humiliate the faith in return." Eleanor bowed and took the folded parchment. Her eyes lingered on Margaery's face with a look both pitying and proud. "You are your grandmother's granddaughter. I hope I am my own." Margaery crossed to the window again and pressed her fingers to the cold wood. The great September steps were already sugared with people. Beggars bundled in patchwork, noblewomen with their hoods drawn, lemon sellers and ragamuffins. The light was sharpening. The city blinked awake like a cat deciding whether to scratch or stretch. When she entered the corridor, 2 Queen's Guard fell into step, half-polished, half-ashamed, boys pressed into armor made for men, shoulders rounded from trying to carry too much. The armor of the third, the silent giant who shadowed Cersei, cast a dull shadow across memory. It did not walk at her heels, and even that was like a breath she had been holding and now let go. Tommen was waiting in the little gallery above the inner ward, legs swinging beneath the bench. He looked thinner than he had a month ago. He was prettier than he should be. Sometimes when he turned his head, she felt something in her heart that was not love and not pity, a fierce protective hunger to turn him into clay and fashion him into safety. He smiled when he saw her and then tried to school it into sobriety because these were grave days. "Your Grace," he said, formal, and then younger. "Margaery." She touched his cheek. He almost leaned into her palm like a boy to warmth. He smelled of soap and paper. "Your Grace," she echoed, because the game mattered. "Will you attend?" He looked away toward the flicker of banners. "I must. It is just." He sounded as if repeating lessons. "Your mother loves spectacle." She kept her voice light. "It may be that there is a better justice done with fewer eyes. It may be that mercy would grow in a smaller room." Tommen's mouth tightened as if around a sour plum. "The High Septon says a king's place is with the people at prayer. And I say a king's place is where his judgment is clearest, away from anyone who might seek to fog it with incense or with flattery." He looked at her, suspicion coming and going across his face like a cloud. "Your brother will confess and be clothed in the star as he wishes." The words tasted of ash, but she knew their shape was necessary. Loras's face had been a map of broken roads when she'd seen it last, his calm more terrible than weeping. She had sat by him and looked at his hands. They had been the hands that gripped lance and lover. They had become the hands of a monk. She would not change them back for him because he did not want to return. She would change 1,000 other things around him instead. "Cersei," Tommen began and faltered. "Cersei will come if spectacle is guaranteed." Margaery slid onto the bench beside him so their shoulders brushed. He straightened unconsciously. She offered him a cup of watered wine a servant brought without meeting his eyes. "If she does not, what will the High Septon do with his gathered thunder? Will he rumble at the empty sky?" Tommen flinched. "Don't speak so of him. He is pious." "I admire piety that feeds children and cleans wounds," said Margaery. "I question piety that sharpens axes and builds cages." She waited while the words found purchase. "If you attend and she does not, her absence will be the heart of the day. If you remain and she does not, the day may find another heart." She laid her hand atop his. It was a small, soft thing. His skin jumped. Sometimes a good king lets others have the show and saves his strength for the afterward. He bit his lip. He looked very young. "I don't wish to be a bad king," he said low. "You are not," she said. "You are surrounded by people who would like to use you. That is not the same thing." She did not look toward the Red Keep's central tower where Cersei's rooms crouched like a cat, or toward the old alchemist's hall where ghosts surely swept the floors in their green sleeves. "If you do go," she added, "take the smallest escort and stand where you can leave quickly if need arises. Better yet, wait for my signal before you leave your chambers. The White Tower's eastern balcony will show you everything that matters." "A signal?" He brightened, then caught himself. "What signal?" "I will send a boy with a rose made of paper. If he is blue, you remain. If he is white, you may come." She smiled. "Blue is for the sea's patience, yes?" White is for innocence. The city likes its little stories. Do you think there will be trouble? His voice was small on that word. I hope there will be wisdom, said Margaery. Trouble often comes to those who seek to stage it. Wisdom sometimes comes to those who prepare for it. She rose. Pray, if it comforts you. Eat, even if the food tastes of dust. Do not open the windows. Do not dismiss your guards, no matter who commands it. She saw his confusion and dismay, and she softened, bent to kiss his brow. Do not be afraid because I caution you. Be proud you are the sort of king to consider caution. He looked as if she had given him a toy and a burden both. I'll do as you say, he whispered. I know you will, she said. And she left him with a smile she kept bright as coin until she had turned the corner and could rub at her temple with 2 fingers and let the breath out slow. The halls were stirring now. Servants made themselves thin against walls, eyes down. 2 sparrows crossed her path with looks of pinch-faced disapproval. She smiled past them, light and guileless, and they twitched uncertain. Lady Olenna was seated in the little antechamber off the queen's apartments with a slice of apple in her fingertips and a look that would shear sheep without bothering with a blade. Around her were 3 of what she liked to call her blooms, girls of middling birth with sharp ears. One was scrawny as a ferret. The other 2 could pass for ornaments until they smiled and showed the quirk at the corner of their mouths that said they knew the price of a man's pride. And a woman's, too. Child, Olenna said, you look like a saint. Saints die, but they are carved nicely afterward. I will live and be carved later, said Margaery, and she knelt beside her grandmother's chair to take her spotted hand. The kitchens are alerted. The watch will watch. Our little friends in the shade will run, not walk. And the High Septon will be invited to remember that the gods attend better when the floor does not collapse into their basements. Olenna laughed, a dry cackle. Basements? You think there is fire in them. I think there is danger in them. Your father will want to stand at Loras's side, Olenna said. He has practiced a speech, dear gods deliver us from his speeches. If you can keep him from making it, there will be enough gratitude in the 7 kingdoms to buy us several new ones. 7 kingdoms, that is. Mace may bellow later. Today he must be useful. Margaery rose, smoothing her skirt. I will tell him to bring wagons to the September Square loaded with food and blankets. I will have him stand atop a cart and throw loaves like a harvest lord. I will tell him my mercy rests on how merrily he throws. Olenna patted her hand. You are my granddaughter, and I am this city's queen, Margaery said, and the words were a cloak around her shoulders as she went out. The square before the great September gathered a hum from every footstep. The Hound's Gate had belched out carts already. Somewhere a boy was singing of oranges and a girl was crying for her mother. Sparrows lined the steps like thistles. The High Septon shone like a pearl caught in old cloth. He looked like any nameless man from the river villages, but when he lifted his hands the hush came, unwilling and complete. Margaery watched him from the carriage window and let him see her looking. A hint of smile, all respect. She entered beneath eyes that cut her to ribbons and did not bleed her. Olenna had said, give them the mask before they force one on you. Margaery let piety sit on her like sunlight, agreeable, not blinding. Loras was brought forward. The gasp that ran through the crowd at his face was a knife twisting in her. He was steady, his hair shorn, the pretty curve of his mouth flattened. She met his eyes and he nodded as if they shared a joke. He made his confession with a simplicity that was either courage or exhaustion, perhaps both. She listened and thought of the way he had laughed once at dinner when she had dropped her spoon, the laugh that had made their father harumph. She kept count of the sparrows. She kept count of the children. There were too many children, scrawny as broomsticks, watching with hungry deer eyes. Qyburn had put crumbs in their hands and made them little wolves. She knew it. She had paid for it herself, in a way, when she had fed them to buy silence, and then in the absence of other silence they had gone to the man who offered different sweets. She noted a girl of about 8 whose shoes were too fine for the rest of her, and a boy with a smear of something green beneath his fingernails. She saw also, near a side door where a spiral stair peered like an eye into the September's underworld. A candle left where there were no votive stands. Her heart hiccuped. She moved, smoothing her face, gliding to the High Septon's side as if pulled by reverence. He looked at her with a gaze that both glowed and measured. "Your Grace," he intoned, and the words poured over her like warm water. "It is meet that the Queen be present when sinners are shaved of pride." "I am glad to be prayed over," Margaery said. "I am glad to see my brother's courage and my king's humility." She pitched her voice so the crowd could taste it. King and humility, placed together like a blessing. "I am less glad to see that our Queen Mother is absent. I fear for her. I fear for all of us." The High Septon's gaze sharpened like a sparrow's beak. "If the Queen Mother honors us with defiance, we will honor the gods with patience." "Patience is holy," Margaery agreed, taking his elbow lightly. "Prudence is holy as well." She leaned closer. "There are candles on the stairs to the crypts. Many light candles among the bones. These are not candles for the dead. They are candles for fire." Her voice was low but not pleading. "If she has chosen to wound the faith and the city, what honor do we pay her by standing still?" He studied her, and she let him see in her face the thing she almost never showed. The edge that did not care for play, that counted lives and made the sum matter. He looked past her to the ripple of men and women and to the glint of sunlight off something just visible through the stair's narrow throat. "Ah," he said very softly. He did not believe. He feared to be made a fool. He feared to be seen to fear. He lifted his hands, and the hush came again. "Defiance cannot stop justice," he said. "Justice is water on a stone. It—" "Look at me," Margaery said, and her voice did not raise, but a swath of faces turned as if she had slapped them. "You have taken my brother's pride for the gods. You say you will take my mother-in-law's for the same gods. If Cersei Lannister has chosen to take flesh and bone for her own, will you stand and let it happen so that your sermon is unbroken?" She looked at the people. She put her hand over her heart. "There is a smell in the September that does not belong to incense. It belongs to old madness. If I am wrong, I will kneel here and ask your forgiveness. If I am right and you do not move, none of us will kneel again." The murmur changed timbre. In the periphery of her vision, she saw one of the Fairquick girls Olenna kept slip near the stair and then vanish like a breath. The High Septon's mouth flattened. "You would do well not to panic the lambs, child. I would do well not to watch them burn." He hesitated a heartbeat too long. Margaery stepped back and raised her hand as if she were in the Queen's garden and called a hound to heel. The City Watch captain, not Ser Merindon, but a man Margaery had picked because he was ugly, which in her experience meant he had been loved less and learned more, was waiting on the steps before the door. He snapped his fingers and two men peeled away and went into the stair noose. In the same breath, 3 of the children Margaery had marked turned with the speed of startled sparrows and ran. One ducked under a rope and made for the nave. The little girl with the nice shoes swung her heeled foot at a watchman's shin like a proper street boy and bolted. People swore. A sparrow cried out that demon seeds were on them. The High Septon's face was thunder. Margaery moved through the jostle to the boy with green under his nails and caught him by the wrist. His eyes were pale and flat with the kind of hunger that had no room for anything else. He tried to bite her. She held him and said into his face, "If you like, you can keep your bite for later. Right now, tell the Q. Yoon, how many candles are in the stairs and who gave you the matches?" He spat. He wriggled like something caught in a snare. A watchman plucked him easily from her grip and lifted him like a kitten. The High Septon's attendant buzzed in his ear. The High Septon's mouth became a drawn seam. "Clear the September," Margaery said. "Steady. Clear it now. Your grace, your piety, your prudence. Show them all." She turned her head and her eyes found the balcony cut into the wall where a thin line of boys and girls in gray were posted to watch for wrongdoers. Among them, she knew, was one with a paper rose folded into his sleeve. She lifted a hand to her ear as if to lay back a curl, and the boy's head went ducking. Above, on the rooflines, She knew that runners were already slipping away toward the Red Keep with their odd, fluttering gaits, their learned paths through gullies and gutters and the bodies of the city. The High Septon raised both hands and shouted for calm, and his attendants began to press the people outward like a gentle tide. The tide ran foul. People were always reluctant to move when fear said they should run. Fear ate the feet. Margaery felt the crowd surge and curdle. She whispered orders and her Bloom girls took them. They spread like dye, each with a different task, some plucking frightened mothers from danger, some speaking into ears that mattered, some merely being seen being brave. Outside, in the square, the first of the carts rolled forward, Tyrell Green yawning with bread. Mace had put on a hat ridiculous enough to anchor the eye so the hand could move quickly without being watched. He flung loaves and bellowed about mercy, and the crowd turned its face like a plant to a window. Margaery could have kissed him for his loud foolishness. Sometimes foolishness did more work than wit. Down in the stair, a light flickered the wrong color. A watchman stumbled up, his hand blackened, his face sweating. "Your Grace," he snapped at no one he could see, at everyone. "There's fire nests, a dozen at least. Candles down to coals and braids of something that... No smell like it. Wet cloths," Margaery said. "Grain. If there's any, pour it over them, smother. Use the wax to plug the cracks if you can." She did not know if that would do a thing to wildfire. She only knew that fire breathed air. Deny it that. She looked to the High Septon and said in a voice meant to hold him like a hook, "Bless the men who go down. Bless them loud. The gods like noise as much as silence." He stared at her a heartbeat and then did as she said, his voice rolling with named saints. The watch moved like men with purpose. The children, those who were not caught in gentle hands with food in them, melted away. One of Qyburn's little birds tried to split from the crowd and ran full into Olenna's cane. He reeled and blinked up at a smile like a hedge of thorns. There were sounds thereafter Margaery would hear later when she tried to sleep. The hiss of water, the idiot giggle of green as it tried to take, the groan of a beam finding heat. There were prayers, too, and someone laughed with terrified relief, and someone else sobbed in a way that was almost a song. In the end, the spiral stairs exhaled only smoke that stank of some alchemist's dream. When she stood again in the light before the steps of the Great September, she had soot on her hands. It had left a crescent under one nail as if she had clawed at the night. People were shouting praises and insults. Someone tried to thrust a babe at her as if to be blessed. She kissed its brow and passed it to its mother. The High Septon's face was gray and angry, and she thought he looked not so much betrayed as embarrassed. He had not wanted a day he did not make, and yet here it was, and it was saving him. He lifted his hand and it trembled with something that might have been thanks. "Let us not pretend it was not there," Margaery said to him softly, so soft that only his fear could hear. "We will all be tested another day if we pretend." He bowed his head a fraction. "There will be reckonings." "There will be," she agreed, as she climbed into her carriage to return to the Red Keep. A thin boy with a paper rose tucked awkwardly behind his ear, as if he were a flower girl in a mummer's play, darted up and tugged at the hem. "Blue, your Grace," he breathed. "Blue, blue, blue." The carriage bumped over a rut. Margaery's hand settled on her lap as if it had never moved. She stared out at the city as if playing the part of a woman calming herself with streets and roofs. "Good boy," she said. The White Tower's eastern balcony was washed in gold. Tommen peered over the crenel, straining for a view he had been told not to take. Ser Boros had planted his booted feet and adopted a scowl meant to look kingly. When Margaery stepped into the chamber that opened onto the balcony, the boy king turned and then flushed, and his face wore both relief and offense at once. He ran to her as if she were a fountain and he had been made to stand all morning in the sun. "You sent blue," he said. "I did." She touched his cheek again and found it hot with worry. "You stayed. Well done." He looked past her as if afraid the words would vanish if not attended. What happened? An old madness was stopped before it woke fully. She took his hands and drew him away from the light. "You will sit with me in the Tower of the Hand, and we will do justice where the air does not smell of smoke." Ser Boros shifted. "Your Grace, you will fetch Lord Kevin up," Margaery said without looking. "Politeness will do. You will also fetch Grand Maester Pycelle. Do not fetch Qyburn." Ser Boros tried to hold onto a posture of authority. "The Queen Mother. The Queen Mother will be sent for when it is expedient," Margaery said, and there was a little quirk at the edge of her mouth that made Ser Boros look away. She had let him keep his dignity in petty ways for months. Today she lit a candle in herself and let him see the shadow it cast. "Do as I say," he went, muttering. The Tower of the Hand had always looked to Margaery like a slab of bread set aside to grow stale. It was severe, doors heavy as judgments, windows narrow as suspicions. She walked into it and made it hers with the way she placed her hands on the chairs and did not ask permission to sit. Tommen hovered and then sat because she did. He looked like a boy in a room full of men who had gone invisible just to watch him flounder. When Kevin Lannister came, he looked friendlier than she remembered. His beard a more stubborn white, his eyes less certain they owned their sockets. He carried his honor like a weight that had been made heavier by lack of sleep. He looked first at Tommen, then at Margaery, and he bowed to Tommen and nodded to her with the bearable courtesy due a queen whose power might be smoke. "Your Grace, my lady, Lord Kevin," said Margaery, and then, because she expected him to bridle at being addressed by a girl who smelled of flowers, she let her voice hold a thread of iron. "We will be brief. There was an attempt this morning to burn the great September of Baelor with wildfire." Pycelle, panting and indignant, entered in time to hear the last word and made a sound like a goose being strangled. "Wildfire," he sputtered. "Who, what, why?" "Questions best asked of men who paint ravens green," Margaery said. The attempt was stopped. There were children involved as messengers and watchers. Qyburn's creatures we suspect, though I will not be the first to say it in court. Kevin's face changed very little. He lowered himself into a chair with old man care and steepled his fingers. "Do you accuse the Queen Mother? I state facts and ask for your help removing the Queen Mother from any ability to harm herself or this realm out of a righteous fury that has nowhere else to go." Margaery smiled slightly when Kevin lifted a skeptical brow. "Let us not be coy. We all know what she has been capable of in her love. Today I ask you to remove temptation." Pycelle wheezed, outraged by everything. "I warned," I said. "The woman has always—" "You mustn't." "Hush," said Kevin, and even his hush carried the echo of barracks. He looked at Tommen as one might look at a small dog that insisted it was sheepdog enough to guard a field. "Your Grace, the Tower of the Hand obeys you. The small council obeys you. The faith is enthusiastic." Tommen looked at Margaery. Margaery did not speak for him. He swallowed, found the place where his words were kept, and said, "My mother will not be harmed. She will be kept safe from herself. She will not be allowed to ensnare men of science and strange faiths in dangerous things. We will call it protective seclusion," Margaery said, "for the Queen Mother's health." Kevin's mouth tugged at one corner. "Your grandmother has the nicer word for prison." Margaery smiled without showing teeth. "There are many words for prison. I prefer the ones that allow a woman a chance to return to the air." Tommen's hand found hers under the table and squeezed, as if to thank her for not beating his mother with words too hard to bear. She squeezed back and then slid her hand free. Qyburn was not fetched because Qyburn could not be found. His laboratory's door was open for the first time in months, and the smell that crept from it was not of dead things but of absence. Margaery had expected as much. Snakes slithered when the ground began to shake. She had dozed among the little birds who would watch for him in the warrens. In the meantime, she asked Pycelle to swear quietly before both gods and men that any practice of secrets of fire would be disciplined with exile. Pycelle swore with a kind of indignation that made it almost a pleasure to listen. He liked having a rule to hide behind. She gave him one and let him puff himself up and try on righteousness. It almost fit him. Almost. Cersei came by late afternoon, not to the Tower of the Hand but to the council chamber as if her place had never been moved. She wore a gown like armor, black and gleaming like a beetle. Her hair was short, her eyes lit by something that made men uncomfortable. She stood in the doorway a moment, letting presence work on the room, and then smiled in a way that bared nothing, as if showing teeth would be beneath her. "My lords," she said. Her gaze slipped across Margaery as if Margaery were a statue. "Your graces." Tommen stood too fast and knocked his head on the chair's carved back. He said, "Mother," in the voice of a boy with a scraped knee, and then caught himself and added with miserable stiffness, "Queen Mother, you were missed this morning," Margaery said. She was generosity in a dress. "The city prayed for you." "Oh, I'm sure," Cersei said. "The city prays with its hand out." Her eyes were dry as well rims. "There was trouble, I hear." "There was an attempt at trouble," Margaery said. "It was stopped." "How clever," Cersei said, and the words had no particular target and every target. "The gods must be so grateful to have such a wise girl among them." She stepped into the room, uninvited, and moved to Tommen with feline grace. He flinched a little and hated himself for it. She leaned to kiss his hair and breathed him as if to memorize it. "My sweet boy," she said. "My last sweet boy." She straightened and turned, and she said lightly but with a weight under the lightness, "I hope all the appropriate people have been punished or will be." "Indeed," said Margaery, and the word held. "But first, your health. We are concerned. You have been under remarkable strain. For a time, the Queen Mother will have the comfort of the Maegor's holdfast and its peace. You will want for nothing. You will be visited as you choose. The city will rest easier knowing no harm will be done you or by you in a time when rumors find tinder." Cersei looked at her as a cat looks at a bird that has learned to play dead perfectly. "My health." "Your health," Margaery repeated, "so that when you return to honor, not whispers. We will call it protective seclusion." "Prison?" Cersei said, blunt as a cudgel, and the word touched a coil in Tommen that made him wince. Cersei saw it and swallowed the rest of what she might have flung. She smiled thinly. "Shall I go quietly then, for the good of the realm? Shall I fold myself into your kind little box?" Kevin cleared his throat. "Sister." It is a pause. "My brother," Cersei said, and made of the word an insult too low for other ears to hear. "A pause. We will call it a chance to be merciful," Margaery said, and then softened. "We are all careful with names because names become strips of silk on which old women embroider histories. Let us give them something pleasant to embroider." She gestured toward the door. "The Maegor's holdfast has a small garden. I have sent a man who tends roses. He is discreet." Cersei laughed, a little bark of disbelief. "You will put me among your flowers." For a heartbeat something that was not hatred crossed her face. Something almost like a woman remembering a day when the world had been manageable. Then she poured ice over it. "Do not think me fooled," she said, and her eyes were knives now. "Do not think your sugar and your bread and your pretty charity will save you when men decide they have had enough of being turned into sheep." "I do not think bread saves men," Margaery said. "I think men save men, and bread helps." She tilted her head. "As will your willingness to be wise today." Cersei stood very still. She looked past Margaery to Tommen, and Margaery saw the line of prophecy lie under the skin of her face like a scar only Cersei could feel. "I know," Margaery thought, with a sympathetic pang so clean it surprised her. "I know what it is to listen to the future claw your sleep." But pity passed like a cloud. She could not serve it. Cersei extended her wrists a fraction. "No chains," she said. "I will not be chained." "No chains," Margaery agreed. "Not today." It was done. The city loved her for what they thought she had done and despised her for the power they believed she wanted. Margaery received both as one accepts rain and sun. Both grew the grain. She opened the granaries that had been locked against a dry spell by men afraid to starve later at the cost of starving now. She found a way to dress generosity in prudence so the merchant princes would not gnash and pray for plague. She walked among bread lines and put her hands on shoulders and asked names and remembered them. She sat with the High Septon and wrote with him a concord of civility that left the faith its prayer and its dignity and its right to correct its own. but clipped the edges of its blade so it might not cut nobles on a whim nor humiliate a queen without the crown's consent. She allowed him to fume and stamp and be soothed and be dramatic. She watched him as she had watched Loras fall off his pony when they were children, both wince and giggle and wait to see if he would laugh or cry. Eventually he laughed, grimly, and signed with a flourish that made the star on his ring glint and throw an eye of light across the parchment. He warned her that men of zeal grew teeth in their sleep. She told him she knew and sent a loaf to his mother's farm, whether it existed or not. She put Kevin back into the position that had wanted him and given it a shape he could bear. She told Mace to build fountains. Mace asked why the city needed more fountains. She told him because fountains were love letters written in stone, and because women without water raised impatient sons. He clapped her on the shoulder without understanding and went off to choose marble. She put Ser Loras in a room with windows that opened onto air and let him choose how much of the world he wished to rebuke. He chose more than she wished and less than she feared. He came to her one afternoon and took her hand and kissed it and said, "I am not what I was." She felt her throat close with something like grief and something harder. "I know," she said. "We will make a world where that man is not needed." He responded with a little curl of his mouth that looked like pity for her hope and love for her audacity. Jaime Lannister came back in a storm that blew dust from the riverlands and stories from the mouths of men who would have gladly betrayed them for a drink. He rode through the river gate with his jaw set and his gilded hand black with mud. The small folk muttered as he passed and then, seeing who it was, fell into a hush because the tales they told about him sometimes sang and sometimes screamed. When he arrived at the Red Keep, he went first to the Maegor's Holdfast and then to the Tower of the Hand. In one he found his sister pacing a garden. In the other he found Margaery pouring tea. He entered without knocking because knocking felt like asking. She did not rise because rising felt like seating. They regarded one another as if each had been shown the other's ghost and hoped for better flesh. "Lord Commander," she said. "No longer," he answered, and that was a sword thrown between them both. Dismissed by a king who learned to sign his name before he learned to sword fight. He smiled. It had no humor in it. "Your doing, I suppose." "His doing," she said. "He told me he had a taste for making his own mistakes. Virtue drips so sweetly from your lips," he said. "Could drown a fly in it. Shall I put lemon in it so it stings?" She gestured to the tea and he sat and held his gilded hand away from the delicate cup as if it were a sin about to be committed. "Your sister is alive. She is cared for," he grunted. "Safer in a cell than in a court. That is the first noble truth you have spoken today." He watched her over the rim of his cup. "You saved the city, or so I am told. Or so it pleases the city to shout while it gnaws your name for seasoning. The city likes a story. I prefer a plan." She leaned forward. "Here is mine. You will serve your house. Kevin will temper you. Tommen will look less to me if he has an uncle who can talk to him of things I cannot. The faith will be grateful to the crown for good order and grateful to the reach for bread. The Riverlands will stop burning themselves every winter to see if they can stay warm. The Iron Bank will be sent a promise and 3 ships of good coin to remind them that we are not oafs. The Dornish will be sent courtesy. Courtesy is a rope. You can pull men with it. And when dragons come?" He said it lightly. He had heard, as everyone had, the crows of birds both black and gilded. He had heard of sails with red on them that did not belong to blood. When stories that are not ours arrive on a tide, she did not look aside. We greet them with wiser stories. She lifted a brow at his slight surprise. "You think I have not heard? I am a gardener's girl. We listen." "You're a lord's girl," he said, "and a queen besides. Gardening and lordship differ less than you'd think. Both look like patience from the outside and are mostly the equal parts of hope and bribery." He laughed at that, a real laugh. It made him younger by a year. "And what of the North?" he asked. "They have crowned a king again that isn't here." "Then we greet him as a king," she said. "Better to quarrel with a king who has been called one than to deny him and then be forced to recognize him when he has blood under his nails." She thought of Sansa Stark, and her throat tightened for a reason she did not examine. Women were expected to be the rope that pulled each other from wells. She intended to make it true. We will send him invitations and food and, if he asks it, an old enemy's sword. We will not call him traitor when we need his winter. You speak like you've made an ally of the weather. I speak like I was raised by the Queen of Thorns, she said, and he had the grace to lift his cup in a toast to a woman who had once called him a pumpkin with a smile. They did as she planned. To the Iron Bank went letters sealed with green wax that did not promise the moon, only gold. To Dorne went casks of arbor white with messages that did not flatter their pride but allowed it to wrap itself around civility like a vine on a trellis. To the north went her best handwriting and her oldest memories. A letter to a girl who had once smiled across a tawny field when the world was prettier and less dangerous. A parcel of good flour, another of salt. A token carved of bone by an old retainer who remembered a Stark lord who did not blink when he had refused to cheat at dice. When the ravens returned, their replies were promising, wary, or perfumed with dust. In the Vale, Lord Protector Littlefinger sent back a missive that smelled of apples and concealment. In the Riverlands, old grudges coughed like men who had never quite recovered from a fever. In the Reach, there were those who thought a Tyrell queen should be queen of everything including their harvest and their daughters. She confronted each as if it were only a weed and a pair of gloves would suffice. Sometimes she woke in the kind of night that felt like water above a drowning face, and she sat at her desk and rubbed at the crescent of ink under her nail where the soot had been long since washed away. She thought of wildfire. She thought of Cersei in her garden with clipped roses that refused to die no matter how hard the wind tried. She thought of Tommen, who slept with a little dog he had taken to calling Valor, as if the word might seep into him in his sleep like balm. She thought of Loras's hands clasped and his brow smooth. She thought of the High Septon, who had learned to smile without showing his teeth because he had fewer left. She thought of Jaime, who came sometimes at night to speak of nothing and everything, leaving through the door with a look that said he did not know who he would be without someone to react to. She did not think of dragons at first, because thinking of them made every other plan feel like a carving of a ship on a spent matchstick. But by spring there were ships on the narrow sea whose prows bit water like wolves. Travelers out of the Stormlands told of an island where old benches had been swept and salt mixed with ash. Dragonstone was awake again. The stepstones hummed with gossip. A new queen had set her flags, the old black and red that had been something like a curse long enough to become hard to believe. Margaery held counsel with Kevin, and with two men she trusted from the Watch and from the Guild of Alchemists who had enough shame to swear to retired prudence. She asked whether to fight or to bow. Kevin said the men of the West would follow gold and the gold would follow fear, and fear did not like to cross water. The Watch captain said men kept peace when bread outweighed rumors. The alchemist raised his hands and said he believed all rumors and had personally selected them. Summon them, Margaery said finally. Summon them to the Dragon Pit. Invite the North. Invite Dorne. Invite the Iron Islands if they can heal their pride enough to come to a place with walls. I will give them a stage on which to become reasonable. Dragons do not become reasonable, Kevin said softly. Queens do, she said, or they stop being queens. Invitations flew and sometimes returned. The king in the north sent Davos Seaworth with a face like an old glove and a manner that made Margaery like him immediately. He looked at her and did not see a girl to be coaxed or a woman to be tricked. He saw a person. He said the north would not kneel again, and he said it warmly, like a man offering you a blanket that you were free to accept or not. He spoke of cold. He spoke of something old that did not want to be remembered but came all the same. He spoke of a dead king who had become someone else. She listened and believed because she understood the way his voice wrapped around the words. How memory and fear sounded when braided. We must not fight among ourselves, she said, and he laughed without fun and agreed, and they drank a toast to good advice no one wanted to drink. From Dragonstone came Missandei, writing with a hand beautiful as lace, and Tyrion Lannister came in person with eyes that remembered the way he had been unremembered. He bowed and made a joke and then watched her as if she were a riddle that might decide how long he lived. We want to end the habit of fire, he said frankly when they sat with maps between them. Your city was almost a bonfire. Our queen has been won at least twice. She has dragons, Margaery said. Fire is a habit hard to resist when one's mouth is a furnace. She is trying to break the wheel, he said, smiling as if he knew how that sounded in a room full of chairs with arms. You are trying to reinvent it so it turns on cleaner axles. Then perhaps we agree that at the very least we should stop running over the poor every time we try to get anywhere. She tapped the map. Oppose me and we will bleed ourselves into puddles. Join me and we will feed ourselves into victory. Against what? He asked, as if he wished to hear her say the word that terrified the North and the cynicism that comforted the South. He wanted to see whether she would choose a ghost or a ledger. Against winter, she said, and against foolishness. She did not add, and against my own instinct for glory, because that was a battle she fought alone in a mirror, and sometimes lost a few inches and sometimes gained them. The day they were set to meet at the Dragon Pit, she walked its cracked arena and listened for the echo of a time when dragons had rattled chains there and the ground had remembered their heat. She had had crews working for weeks to make it less of a ruin. Cleared weeds, shored up the makeshift stages she'd designed so no one's pride would be bruised by the height of another's. She walked across the broken sand like a woman who had learned to cross deserts at a march and seas in a storm and rooms full of men in ropes made of her own name. She had eyes that looked as if she had sometimes forgotten to sleep for reasons that could not be spoken. She bowed, shallow and correct, to Tommen, who sat stiff and sweating with Margaery's hand on the place between his shoulder blades where a boy carried his fear. Your Grace, Daenerys said. Your Grace, said Margaery, and the words were flexible as willow. Welcome to a city that has learned to prefer being unburned. I prefer that as well, said Daenerys, and if there was humor there, it had sand in it. They spoke like people who had learned to do sums in different schools and now had to share a slate. Tyrion drew lines. Davos made wise noises like knots pulled tight. Yara slouched and smiled and waited for a reason to be pleased. The High Septon spoke when it would lend him gravity and stayed quiet when it would not. Margaery was patient. She let others be clever in their own mouths so they would chew less on hers later. She made her first ask small. Supplies to the north. Salt cod and ale and tallow. Dany's ships could bear some of it. The Reach could supply some. The Lannister gold would promise more. The Circle liked it because it felt practical and did not cut any particular pretension. Then the second ask, a pause. No sieges but those against the dead. No tax increases without an equal increase in bread. No burning the countryside to cook dinner. The North nodded. The Dornish hid their eyes in their cups and nodded too. Yara said something filthy and agreeable. Dany measured Margaery and said, yes, for a season. And then, Margaery asked, because you always asked that when someone offered you a season. Then we will see whether kings can learn to share, Dany said, and she glanced at Tommen with a look that contained as much pity as ambition. Margaery recognized it. She had worn it herself once in a mirror and allowed herself to be repulsed by it until she had changed it into something more like protection. They agreed to send men to see what the sea did beyond the wall. They agreed to move grain in a way that did not make men feel their bellies were being stolen. They agreed to meet again. Before they left, Margaery asked Dany to walk with her among the ruin. They made their way past a pile of stones that once had had names. You will not stop, will you? Margaery said, and there was no accusation in it. No. I cannot, Dany said, and there was no apology in it. I have crossed too many dead and too much fire to turn around and say I wanted a picnic instead. The people tell me to sit and I stand. The men tell me to be quiet and I sing. The gods have said nothing. I would prefer it if they stayed that way. Margaery smiled with a twinge. I prefer mine noisy so I can ignore them with cause. They stood looking at the sky, which had turned that particular ripeness it found before dusk, a fruit about to bruise. Margaery thought of the city, its chim, nays and secrets, its children with green under their nails who might learn to forgive themselves. She thought of Cersei in the garden plucking blooms until her fingers bled, and of Jaime sitting with a cup, asking if there might be a way to make a world where he would not be the punchline to his own story. She thought of herself and would not allow the thought to become a prayer. Dany's dragon stretched its wings, and the sound was old law being rewritten. When the White Walkers came through the wall, no horn had told them to, no courtesy had warned. They came as weather-wearing bones, as silence full of teeth. They made the north small and the south less clever. The season of pause crumpled like paper and had to be smoothed each morning and re-signed anew. Margaery sat in rooms where maps were soaked in tea and men cried and bit their knuckles and then laughed because laughter kept frost from settling on the inside of their ribs. She kept bread moving. She learned to love men who could shoe a horse faster than another could die. She let Tommen sleep and then handed him the pen when the letter would be read later by a man who needed to see a child's firm letters to believe there was still a crown who thought he mattered. In the end, what saved them was not cleverness. It was that cleverness learned its limits and stopped insisting it could do more than it could. Men burned the dead and did not take pleasure in it. Women sharpened knives to cut bread and to cut ropes and to cut throats if they must. Dany's dragons ate meat that was foul to smell and dreadful to see. Jon Snow stood with a sword that had seen more dawns than any of them. Margaery stood in a city that had meant to devour itself and refused. She thought of Cersei in her cell and went to her and unlocked the door. Cersei looked up slowly, as if she had been practicing not being startled. She was thinner now, her skin a map of nights. She regarded Margaery and said nothing for a long time. "There will be a procession tomorrow," Margaery said, and that word sounded obscene in a world where men froze with their mouths open. Not for celebration, for the living to remind themselves they can be seen. "You will walk in it, beside me." Cersei's lip curled a fraction. "You would have me as a gold plate on your table. I would have you as a woman who has survived a humiliation, and thus might help others survive theirs." Margaery waited. "I would have you as proof that we are not the sort of queen who throws women into the river for being inconvenient." "We?" Cersei said, tasting the word as if it were a bitter almond. "You and your boy." "We and this city," Margaery said. "We and the Reach and Dorne and the North and the dragons. We and even the Iron Islands when they manage to be sober." She smiled and saw Cersei not smile back, but saw the edge of unwilling admiration like a shadow in her eyes. "You won," Cersei said, and the way she said it was not a surrender. It was an acknowledgement of a kind of game that had turned into a different one while she had been kneeling at her own altar. "Not cleanly, not as I would have liked, but you won." "I am winning," Margaery said. "There is no end to it." They walked together the next day, a queen and a queen mother, and men who had thought they preferred to jeer found their jeers crumble in their mouths before a woman who did not flinch and another who did not triumph. Margaery held her head high and let the light gild the little flowers in her hair. Tommen walked behind them with valor trotting, too serious for its own pause. Jaime walked where he could see both of them and neither could see him. The High Septon muttered prayers that sometimes fell asleep halfway between his lips and the air. Margaery became the true queen not because she was crowned more than once by hands that shook less each time. Not because the Great Council later said in careful words that the Iron Throne had been a bad chair and should be replaced by a lighter one on which one could not lean too far. She became the true queen because when men shouted for blood she shouted for bread, and when they demanded spectacle she gave them something quieter and harder, and because she made a habit of listening to people without titles as if they were the ones who would one day bury her, which they would be. She became the true queen when she stopped pretending to be the city's mother and became instead its daughter, stubborn and affectionate and not above breaking a rule when it was a mean one. She became the true queen when the city told its children stories in which she was sometimes foolish and sometimes too soft and sometimes too shrewd, but always, in the end, there. When the dead were finally driven back into the cold that had invented them. When Jon Snow did the things stories later lied about in different ways. When Dany's dragons screamed and one fell and the sky tore and mended and men pretended it would always have mended. Margaery sat at a table that was not the small council's table, because she had burned that table herself in a fit of symbolism she immediately regretted. This table was a simple board, the kind a carpenter could make with a good eye and a planed patience. Around it sat Kevin, gaunter and steadier. Pycelle snored less because there was someone else to snore more. Tyrion toyed with a cup and did not drink. Yara had her boots on the table and took them off when Margaery looked. Davos leaned on his knuckles and looked as if he wished the sea would come in and be asked to sit. Margaery stood. She spoke of things that would sound tame later when men lied about them in songs. Grain, roads, the watch, the little birds sworn to carry messages for coin but not for knives. The faith's right to do what the faith might do and no more. The North's right to call itself what it wished and to be called it in return. The South's right to insist on grace in trade. Dorne's right to be Dorne, which was an art. The Iron Bank's right to be tedious. The right of girls to eat meat. The right of boys to cry without being beaten. She made it sound like law, and it was, but under it there was something else, a hum like the city at dawn, the sound of a thing that wanted to live and knew at last how it might. Tommen listened and did not say much, and that was part of what made the city love him more than they had reason to. He was not made for rule. He had been made into something better than a king by a woman who loved him without asking that he turn into a pillar. He married her properly one spring day when the orange trees in the keep's little garden had finally forgiven the winter, and she let him kiss her and she let herself be kissed, and if there was a breakage in her where children might have been made, she did not show it to anyone but the moon. He grew into his crown as if it had been a hat that had made his ears stick out less over time. He learned to say no and to be loved for it. He learned to say yes and to swallow the bile that sometimes rose at compromise. In the end, he lived. And that was more miraculous than all the prophecies that had been carved into his mother's heart ever allowed. The city called him the gentle later, when men had time to ornament. Margaery called him Tommen, and when she had to, my king, and he called her Margaery, and sometimes, when they were alone and the dog had been coaxed into some other room, mother of the city. She never corrected him. It was a strange title and only half true. It was enough. Cersei lived too. That was part of Margaery's victory and a thorn in its side. She walked the holdfast garden and sometimes cut the roses off their stalks in fury and flung them aside, and sometimes, in softer rages, pruned them properly so they would bloom again. She and Margaery were never friends. They were not sworn enemies either. They became something like women who had survived a shipwreck and kept finding each other in the market, and nodding and saying, "We are still here, and I might hate you, and that must count for something." Jaime visited both, and sometimes neither, and carved his own path through a country that had always been a mirror to him and at last had learned to be a map. He died later than songs claimed, and not because of a woman, and there was no poetry in it, and that made it bearable. In the years that followed, people told a story that made Margaery laugh when she was alone and allowed herself that luxury. They said she had outplayed a lioness, tamed a dragon, bought a wolf a dinner, and taught an octopus to shake hands. She knew that none of those things had been true in the way songs like to be true. She had done something less grand and more difficult. She had fed a city until it trusted its own stomach, and then she had told it a different story about itself that the city decided to believe. She had prevented a fire that would have explained everything, and instead she had been forced to explain everything without the convenience of ash. On an evening when the sky over Blackwater Bay looked like wine someone had dropped a pearl into, Margaery walked up to the balcony where she used to wait for a paper rose. The boy who had worn one behind his ear that day had a shop now. He sold twine and stories, and under the counter he sold something like hope for people who had none, and she had made sure the watch turned their heads when that hope cost less than bread. She rested her forearms on the stone and closed her eyes and listened to the city's thousand-table murmur, the clatter of plates and the sound of cups, the running feet and closing shutters, the prayers and the curses and the sweetness when someone laughed at a joke that was good enough to tell twice. She thought of Olenna in the Reach, old now, older than old, who had once looked at her when she was a girl and said, "There are two kinds of queens, child, the kind that eats and the kind that grows." Margaery had not understood. She did now. She turned back to the chamber where the table waited and her people with it. She arranged her face as one arranges flowers, and she arranged her spine as one arranges a sword. She stepped onto the stone and stood at the head because circles were good for meetings and terrible for decisions. She put her hands flat and said, "There is news from the Stepstones, and from Old Town, and from the Bay of Seals. We will need to think about ships, and about grain, and about men who say the wrong things when drunk, and about children who say the right things when hungry." They laughed, and then they were quiet, and then they listened. They were hers and she was theirs, and the city was loud and faithful and sometimes cruel, and the sea breathed, and the dragons slept on their rocks, and the north kept its cold, and the reach kept its bread, and the desert kept its pride, and the iron islands kept their salt. The queen kept her poise and her plans and her habit of putting her fingers to her lips when she had an idea she did not want to smile while she spoke. She kept a little crescent of soot in her memory to remind her that fires liked to be started and forgot how to stop themselves. She kept a rose pinned in her hair without thorns. There would be wars again, of course. There would be bad harvests and men who decided to do an old harm in a new hat. There would be births that made whole rooms weep, and deaths that maidens go quiet for a week. There would be a day when someone would decide that the crown should sit on another head because that head would look better in a portrait. But in those years, and for some years afterward, when the bells rang at dawn, the city lifted its face and did not count how many times they rang before it smelled smoke. Margaery Tyrell, whose hair had once been brighter than it was now, walked among her people and did not pretend anything except that she belonged to them. She knew she had not burned their faith, and she had not starved their mouths, and she had not said that she loved them without meaning to prove it. That made her true, and that made her queen. And if she had outplayed a woman born under a red comet and a girl raised by wolves and a boy whose father had been a liar, she had done so by making sure the game wasn't what everyone else thought it was. At night, in her chamber that still smelled faintly of sweetbriar laid into the wood on a morning that felt like a dare, she would sometimes lay awake and listen to Tommen's breathing from the adjoining room. She counted it without counting. She remembered a boy with green under his nails and a paper rose who grew into a man with twine around his wrists because he measured out rope all day long. She remembered a woman who cut roses and sometimes set them floating in a bowl just to see if they could learn to swim. She remembered a dragon's wing drawing dark across the sun. She remembered being young enough to believe that being loved would suffice, and older enough to know that being necessary would have to do. When sleep came, it did not always bring dreams. Sometimes it brought only the sound of the city's heart, slow and steady, and a smell of bread crust cracking open to steam. In the morning, she rose and dressed and set her hands on the table and told herself the truth as if it were a story. That power was less like a crown than like a loaf, that it was made new each day and gone each night, and that if you hit it, it molded. She ate a little and walked down into the world, and was again what she had made of herself on a morning long ago when bells had threatened to ring out her life and she had taught them a different song.